How are you, folks? How are you? Welcome back to Rediscovering Our Past. In this podcast, where we try to get to know the figure and the work, the research, and his doctorate by Miquel Pérez-Sánchez Pla, who is leading us to understand things about ancient Egypt that are astonishing us, that are blowing our minds, that are making us see everything from an absolutely unique and very new. Miquel, hello again. How are you?
How are you? Good afternoon. How are you?
Well, let's tackle another new chapter. Just a reminder that you have the first two here right at the top of the image. We're launching the link with which you can review those first two podcasts to continue with this third one. A third one that is going to lead us to put on a little bit of the salakot, or the suit of Indiana Jones, because we are going to go down, almost like archaeologists, because today we are going to know much better the Great Pyramid and all the monumental complex of Giza, because it is important to know such impressive things as its measurements, as for example relations with other pyramids that are nearby, that maybe there is always the doubt of whether they have it or not. If they have it or not, and why they have that relationship. First, let's start with the beginning of all this, that doubt of whether the Giza complex has 3 or 4 pyramids, or has 4 pyramids. Miquel, what is it?
Well, look, I can't be an archaeologist because I'm not one. I am an architect. Having said that, well, there is an archaeologist who has worked in depth on the whole issue of the 4th pyramid, which is the pyramid of Djedefre, which is in Abu Rabas. It is 8.2 kilometers north of the Great Pyramid, and it is the pyramid of the son of Cheops. There it is. And successor of Cheops. There has been a lot of speculation that there was a father-son divorce. Well, in the second book, we'll see that that's not the case. Because when it comes down to it, the relationship of the pyramid of Djedefre with the rest of the pyramids of Giza is very close from the mathematical point of view and from the astronomical point of view. That is, curiously, from the astronomical point of view, there is a reference to the precession of the equinoxes. That is, we know that the precession of the equinoxes is the rotation of the Earth between the fixed stars, which has a duration of 25,770 years. It is the largest calendar known to mankind. And the Egyptians clearly knew it. Well, the fact is that the pyramid of Djedefre, in addition to this astronomical relationship with the whole of Giza, also has an exceptional mathematical relationship. That is, it is linked to the Giza complex through a Pythagorean triangle, a huge Pythagorean triangle. The fact is that it will be in Book 2, the irrefutable demonstration that that the pyramid of Djedefre is the 4th pyramid. This was already said or somehow intuited by Zahir Hawass when the Egyptian archaeologist worked on this pyramid. He deconstructed it because it seems that during the Roman Empire it was destroyed. But I mean, it seems that it was during the Roman Empire and now it is practically razed to the ground. The foundations and little else remains. It has a particularity that it is on a higher level than the one called Giza, with which, so to speak, it is closer to the sky, the pyramid of the son, than with respect to the pyramid of the father, as if that it was not possible to build a bigger pyramid because in the joint project of Giza, which is another subject that I deal with in Book 2, that is, Giza, nobody should think that there were 3 pyramids placed at random in any way. That is, these 3 pyramids responded to mathematical and geometric laws in their position, and moreover, they did it in a way that they did it in a very different way. And they did it in a very surprising way. Apparently today, but that in the past had all the logic, that is to say, the reference that they took was the Sphinx of Giza. We will talk about this in more depth, but what I can anticipate is that the Sphinx of Giza was much earlier than the pyramids.
You have anticipated, but very little, because it is the next thing I was going to ask you. And the truth is that I was already rubbing my hands together because it is a topic that I love, the topic of the antiquity of the Sphinx. We all know more or less if it has interested us a little bit. I am sure that you also know the main approach that John Anthony West and Robert Schoch, who is a geologist at the University of Boston.
Yes.
And he is the one who, I remember the story explains it perfectly when John Anthony West addressed to him to test it. He invited him to see the pyramid, telling him that he had contemplated a geological anomaly. That could be more, that could indicate that it was older. But in reality, he, in his statements, I remember perfectly, he said to me with the eyes of a geologist, I'm going to go there, I'm going to pass sentence, this is not so old, far from it. And he says that his great surprise was when he went there and saw what he saw, that now you will explain it to us. He really said that here there is a very important background.
There are very important contradictions in respect to what is the sculpture of the Sphinx. It is a sculpture excavated in the ground, which for centuries and probably millennia was covered, except for the head, by the sand of the desert. And what is striking is that the ware that has the lower part of the body of the Sphinx is much higher than that of the pyramids. So if they were contemporary, the first thing you say, well, the logical thing is that the ware would be similar. But then there is another element that is of pure geometry, or if you want, of pure design, I would say, which is that the head with respect to the body has a very different proportion in such a way that the idea of Western shock is very clear, which is very previous. Shock says that it could be between the 5th and 7th millennium, if I remember correctly, before Christ, and the 5th and 8th, perhaps, and he practically nails the dating. I can confirm this dating with total and absolute certainty. That is because it is the stars, it is the planets, specifically, who determine the exact date of the Great Sphinx. This is one of the key elements of Book 2. And in it I explain that it responds to a fact, to a singular astronomical phenomenon, in such a way that it also certifies the antiquity through that system that I was talking about before, that the numbers are transformed into words, because there are two key numbers in the whole research process, and they are found in the Great Pyramid. They are found in Giza, which is the 888, which is the number of the primordial God One. But there is also another one, which is 892. Curiously, both numbers are on the Sphinx of Giza and are associated with the position of the planets. It's a bit long to explain. I'm not going to tell it now. We will do a specific podcast for this in its day. And I develop it with total clarity in the second book. And I have to add that if the 888, which is in the Sphinx, and it's on the Great Pyramid, is the number, and it's also, we've seen it in the previous podcast, in Saqqara it is the number of the primordial God One. The 892 is the number of the name. It's the number of the name of the mother civilization of ancient Egypt.
Assimilate it, give it to pause if you want to. Think about it a little. If you have no other option, here I have the book that we are talking about. Come on, the podcast, we are going at the rate of chapter per podcast. That is, now we are it will be chapter 3 more or less, reviewing the concepts that come out there. But if you want, you cannot wait any longer. You have the option to always buy this book. There are 2 editions, by the way. Is self-published by Ancient Egypt 21. The other is the editorial Larousse, but both can be purchased if you want on our website that you have in the description also, is antiguoegiptoxxi.com. That is to say, you have that option if you want, and you can't stand it any longer. But if not, keep on joining us. We are enjoying very much here the company of Miquel. Yes, sorry, in that respect.
About the book you are talking about, at the end of the book, and I won't anticipate things to avoid making a spoiler, at the end of the book it is revealed that the name that corresponds to the primordial God One and the name that corresponds to the mother civilization of ancient Egypt.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Continuing with what we were talking about, very close to the Sphinx is the temple of the Valley of Kefren. We find blocks of up to 100, 200, 300 tons. Let's see, Miquel, why did they need such big blocks? And above all, what do they call them? I think that also in the temple of Miserino, we also found something similar, right?
It is a block of 100 tons in the temple in the valley of Kefren. One of 400 tons in the temple of Kefren's funerary, which is the one east of the pyramid of Kefren. And another of 200 tons in the funerary temple of Mecerinos, which is also located east of the pyramid of Mecerinos. Of course, from the point of view of contemporary technology, we have great difficulties to move blocks of these characteristics because we need several cranes. But of course, the first question that arises is, hey, these gentlemen, why do they need blocks of these characteristics? Because even cutting the stone, it is easier to make blocks that can be moved manually by the workers themselves. Of course, the only way to understand this is that these gentlemen were demonstrating technological muscle. I mean, look at what we are. Look, I mean, researchers of the future, look at what we are capable of doing. Of course, 400 tons, hey, is a real nonsense. That is to say, only the 100 tons would have measures similar to those of a 15-meter living room, of 15 square meters, of a house, of a typical house in any of our cities. 15 square meters is not a very big living room, but it is enough to accommodate the life of a family. Well, in 15 meters by 3, approximately, if I remember correctly, by 2.5 meters high, that would be the equivalent of 100 tons. So imagine what 400 tons could be. We are talking that each cubic meter of volume comes to weigh between 2.4 and 2.6 tons. Then, of course, we are talking about dimensions that are unimaginable. For a civilization that theoretically didn't even know about the wheel, and the chisels they had to cut stone were made of bronze. Bronze. They should explain it to me because I don't understand it.
Well, one hypothesis would be that they knew iron, but even so it also implies a series of tremendous difficulties that cannot be explained. Difficulties that can't be explained. Well, we leave it there because we would already enter the field of speculation, but well, we also leave it to you to speculate whatever you want, which is very healthy, to raise the hypotheses you want, but we will continue advancing in this fantastic complex, this monumental complex of Giza, because there is also a site that has its mystery, which are the pits of the solar boats. 4 pits were found next to the Great Pyramid, but especially the one that is in, I think it is in the southernmost, which is where they found all the solar boat, but it has some very curious measurements. Very curious.
Let's see.
Sorry, Miquel. It is reconstructed. Yes.
It is perfectly reconstructed. It is located in the southern area of the pyramid. I do not know if it has been a great success to make the volume hooked right to the pyramid and in the place of the pit, but well, there it is. The boat is absolutely spectacular. And what is striking is the perimeter of the pit. We are talking about 60 royal cubits, and 60 royal cubits are 31.416 meters. 10 times the number pi again. Okay, and here we could have, if nothing else, a new unknown. Let's go to solar boats, theoretically. Well, this boat seems to be the one that carried the remains of the pharaoh through a crossing of the Nile to his eternal abode. But the solar boats symbolically represented those that carried the pharaoh through the heavens, as if he were an interplanetary ship in the direction of the called Duat. The Duat was an area that was between the Duat is the name it receives in the new empire. In the old empire, it was called Dat. These solar boats had to go to the place where it was believed that they were going to rest. The weapons of the pharaohs were believed to rest, which is the area between the constellation Orion and Sirius. The star Sirius is an absolutely very important star for ancient Egypt. It turns out that the calendar of ancient Egypt began on the date on which Sirius on the date on which Sirius reappeared in the heavens after being obscured by the light of the sun for 70 days. And I have to tell you that Sirius is a star that we see as white today, which in ancient times was seen as reddish. And the big surprise is that later on, about 1860, it was discovered that Sirius was a binary star that is composed of two stars, one of which is a sun-like star, and the other is a hyperdense star. A hyperdense white star, which is the evolution of a red giant star. A red giant star, that is, when a normal star begins to lose helium, it grows. In that growth, it can eat its entire planetary system, and that's the process of swelling into a red giant and then contracting into a white dwarf. Well, that's what seems to have happened with Sirius B. So, of course, the big question is whether that was an historical process proto-historical, that is, produced in the last 10,000 years, just to understand us, or if that fact was much, much earlier, and it could be explained that it was red by the fact that the classical poets or writers spoke of Sirius as a red star if it was over the horizon. You know that the sun, when it is above the horizon, is reddish, because the incidence of the sun's rays is not perpendicular to the earth, and that gives it a color of these characteristics. Well, I was talking about Sirius in this sense for a reason. We are talking many times about the number P, and it just so happens that Sirius is 8.601 light years away. Yeah, and that's 3,141.5.6 light days. That is the question I ask myself from the great importance of Sirius, because the Egyptian calendar began with Sirius, and Sirius was, let's see, in the celestial representation of Isis. The question I ask myself is, let's see, it's not too much of a coincidence that they are 3,141, 3,142 light days. The distance to Sirius and the number pi, we find it everywhere, because that's 1,000 times pi. Let's see. The question may seem absurd from the point of view of what we know today about ancient Egypt. But if we are permanently finding data that give us information at the geodetic level, at the astronomical level, at a mathematical level, and at a very advanced geometrical level, at least we have to ask ourselves, it is a coincidence that the distance to Sirius is, in light days, 1,000 pi, that the Great Pyramid is 100,000 pi square cubits, and that the perimeter of Saqqara is 1,000 royal cubits, and that even in the pits, the starships, in quotation marks, into which the solar boats were transformed, also contain the number, is, in this case, as 10 times. We have to ask ourselves this question.
Because so many times a thing we have to begin to distinguish between chance and causality, and also we will see it, because as we go on we will see that the coincidences are repeated again and again, and not only with the number b, but with other mathematical elements that are of great importance and that are much further ahead, and then they are supposed to be in time than they should be. But well, let's continue with this visit to the monumental complex of Giza, because we are already going with the pyramid, which has an absolutely unique shape. Already from its original form, let's say, it is not a classic pyramid, but we can find three particularities in it. One, which is that it has a plinth of a real cubit in height. Two, that the lateral faces of the Great Pyramid were not flat. And three, that it had a differentiated coronation of what you have already told us about, but that those three elements configure it, or give it, better said, a particularity with respect to the other pyramids built. That already makes it different. But above all, the plinth, specifically a real cubit in height, what does it mean?
And let me go back, because I went by Sirius, I went too far. And let's go back to Earth first, because there are a couple of very important elements in the solar boat. You asked me about the measurement. I didn't give it. The length of the solar boat was 43.6 meters, almost 44 meters. That is, if we relate it to our scale in the city of Barcelona, the diagonal, which is the second most important avenue of the example, is 50 meters. That is to say, the solar boat of Cheops, placed transversely, would only be less than 3 meters on each side of the diagonal of Barcelona, of the width of the diagonal of Barcelona. The enormous size and the other exceptionally important element. And the other exceptionally important element, because we were talking all the time about the importance of mathematics, is that it had 1,224 pieces. Well, as if it were 25 or 23. Well, no, sir. 1,224. The number 1,224 is 8 times 153. What about the number 153, you may ask? The number 153 is the only 3-digit number that is equal to the sum of its cubes. The sum of its cubes. That is to say, the number 1 multiplied by itself 3 times is 1. The number 5 multiplied 3 times by times itself is 125. The number 3 multiplied 3 times by itself is 27. The sum of the 3 gives us 153. And what does that have to do with the solar boat? Well, that 1,224 pieces are 8 times 153, and 8, the number of Thoth, the number of the city, Hermopolis Magna, which in Egyptian meant Gemenu. That's sorry, I say. That in Egyptian was the name Gemenu, that Gemenu, its name is the equivalence to the Egyptian language is 8. That is the city of the God of wisdom. It turns out to be a number, the name of a city. That is, imagine that Barcelona is called 5, or that Valencia is called 7, or Valencia were called 7, or that Madrid was called 2. It is very shocking. We cannot imagine a city that is defined by a number. Well, yes, sir. The city of the God of wisdom and the arts was a city that was defined by the number 8, which was the name of the city itself. Well, very well. If we take the 153 and multiply it by 8, we get the 1,224 pieces of the solar boat of Cheops. And what is so special about that? Well, 8 is the maximum power of the sacred decade. It is the same. It is the only cubic number, the only number that multiplied 3 times by itself. There is a number that multiplied 3 times by itself gives you 8. 2 times 2, 4 times 2, 8. So what happens? When it comes down to it, if the 2,224 pieces of the solar boat of Cheops, it turns out to be equal to 2 to the cube, plus 10 to the cube to 6. And if 10 is the base, it is the base of the decimal system. 6 is the base of the sexagesic system. Therefore, attention that this is far from being casual, because there is another one. 153 has another peculiarity. It is the sum of 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5, etc., plus 15 plus 16 plus 17. And 17 is the number of Osiris. That is, the sum of the numbers 1 through 17 is 153. 17 is the number of Osiris. Why? Because it turns out that the day of Osiris's death was the 17th day of the month of Atir, the 3rd month of the Egyptian calendar. So imagine that we are linking the mathematics. We are linking it with mythology. But there is still one more fact. The length of the solar boat of Cheops of 43.6 meters is nothing else than 5 times exact. Is nothing more than 5 times exactly the measure of each of the edges of the Great Pyramid. Because to my exceptional surprise, when I measured the edges of the Great Pyramid, which together with the bases are the defining lines of the pyramid itself, but they are the ones that raise the pyramid to the sky. It measured 218 meters absolutely exactly, 218.00 meters. I'm wrong. There was 1 millimeter difference. Of course, the question is, and what is the number 218? By the system that I will explain to you in the 5th podcast, the number 218 is nothing else but the first 3, which corresponds to the first 3 letters of the name of the primordial one God. Therefore, the 4 lines that rise up from the ground to the sky in the Great Pyramid telling us 4 times the word that synthesizes the name of that one god or Nezerua, which is documented in the 4th millennium BC in Egypt.
Wow.
And now if you want to go into the Great Pyramid, but I thought it was essential to talk a little more in depth about
It is, because it also puts us in a position where we can start to sense our audience. You guys, I'm sure, because you're very smart, because you're watching this podcast, and I'm sure you figured it out. There's one thing that seems somehow flowing out of all of this, that there is like a mixture of mathematical religious knowledge. That is, there is a very religious approach to mathematics, the Pythagoreans, very religious, the Pythagoreans. Pythagoras also had a religious approach, and I think we are going to find him perhaps redefining the relationship of Pythagoras to mathematics. Perhaps the relationship of Pythagoras with ancient Egypt.
That's right, that's right. Look, let's see Pythagoras. We have to keep in mind that he spent 20 years in Egypt, that he studied in the houses of life, and that he was anointed priest. Therefore, the Pythagorean knowledge, which among other things, what it does is to distinguish the numbers as is to distinguish numbers as pre-existing entities, independent of the unit of measurement they determine. This is an essential fact to understand. The Egyptian architecture of the Great Pyramid and Giza. For example, if I make you like this, you are not thinking of 5 fingers. You are thinking of the number 5, to which is not the Pythagorean thing that worked exactly like that. The numbers were pre-existences. They even came to consider the first 10 numbers as the sacred decade, so that the numbers pre-existed independently of what they designated. So what do we find in the Great Pyramid? Numbers that are mathematical, that have geodesic correspondences, that have astronomical correspondences, that have geometrical correspondences, and the other way around. That is to say, we find a braiding of knowledge in which numbers are interchangeable without considering the units of measurement, and that allow you to get from one science to another. And this I find absolutely original, and I think we owe it to Pythagoras to be able to understand it, precisely because he brought that system of knowledge, in the same way that I have to tell you that the theorem of Pythagoras is very clearly inside the Great Pyramid. And it is the one that has allowed me to reconstruct the original shape of the Giza plain, which was part of an arrangement plan in which the 3 pyramids were interconnected geometrically and were in turn interconnected with the Sphinx as the first element, generator of the work of Giza, and in turn were interconnected geometrically, as I mentioned before, with the 4th pyramid, with the pyramid of Djedefre.
Oh, well, I guess. Now I also have many questions to ask myself, because this has to be assimilated, this has to be digested. It is true that I had already read the book a long time ago, but every time I hear it from Miquel's mouth, one still has more questions to ask oneself, and we will try to solve them. And I also want to tell you, I wanted to tell you that we have an email address, which is info@antiguoegipto21.com, where you can contact us and ask us whatever you want. In that address, you can ask us anything you want, and we will comment on it. Let's quickly go inside. I was telling you that the pyramid has 3 elements, which is the base of a real cubit in height, the lateral faces of the Great Pyramid, which were not flat, and the differential crowning that we talked about before. But quickly, Miquel, plinth for what? What do you put a plinth for? Well, when the other pyramids don't have it?
They don't have it. Let's see, the plinth is a leveling element. Think that the pyramid sits on top of the natural rock of Giza, so that there is a part of the natural rock that is cut to define the plinth. But even inside the pyramid, the rock overhangs. What effect did it represent from the point of view of stability? It is very clear that a pyramid, if it receives lateral thrusts, it hardly moves, but if in addition it has an anchorage in the middle, it needs to secure it completely. That is to say, if they came from the experience of a tower that had collapsed due to the lateral thrust of a tsunami, it would be difficult to move it. by the lateral thrust of a tsunami with the pyramid, in addition with an anchor in the middle of it, they were securing it completely. Well, having said that, there is another very important element. Apart from leveling platforms that achieved a practically exact leveling, the plinth, what else is it good for? Well, the height is a real elbow. In other words, for the first time in the history of architecture that I know of, the monument is giving us the necessary instrument of analysis for the researchers of the future. It is telling us, look, this monument is so important that if you want to understand something, take this unit of measurement, And that logically is what Petri did. And that is what all the researchers who have been following him have been doing. That is to say, the elbow is the definer of the unit of measurement of the plinth, when measuring an elbow, is the definer of the unit of measurement of the Great Pyramid.
And when we talk about the faces visually, yes, there was that historic image that was taken for the first time from an airplane, where there you can see perfectly what is called the lightning of Giza.
The lightning effect, yes. That is due to the fact that the triangular faces are not absolutely flat triangles, but the apotema, that is to say, the height of the triangle of the faces is not absolutely flat, but the apotema, that is to say, the height of the triangle of the faces. The height of the triangle of the faces is slightly tucked in. This allows that instead of being a square shape on the plan, it is like this at the ends. And it is tucked inwards in such a way that it has a star-shaped form of 4-point star-shaped, slightly star-shaped, because the difference in each one of the sides is of 1.7 real cubits, which should be must be about 85 centimeters approximately, enough so that the passage of the tangent light in the equinoxes, lightning effect when the light jumps from one side to the other. This fact is absolutely singular. And it is what led me to understand that the pyramid had a crowning sphere. Why? Because the blocks that emerge, that are left on the north face, have an approximate slope of 51.85 degrees plus or minus 1 minute. Now, but it turns out that these same blocks, if you take them all the way to the top, you don't get the height with that slope. You don't get the height with that slope that it has always been determined that the pyramid had, which was 280 cubits plus one of the plinth, and that one of the most unexpected singularities that it presents, and that is known since antiquity, is that it is proportionate to the height, to the distance to the sun at perihelion, that is, at the moment of maximum proximity of the sun to the earth, of course. That is to say, they are telling you clearly that the Egyptians knew what was the distance to the sun at its moment of maximum proximity to the earth. Well, the fact is that by giving this slope at the center of the apothem, I realized that we didn't get to that height. I thought that one of two things. Either all previous researchers were wrong and had given a correct proportion with the distance to the sun, and the Great Pyramid was not proportionate with the distance from the sun, or the pyramid was missing something. And what could it be missing? Well, from there, the image of a mountain topped by the sun is one that we all have. And as I explained in a previous podcast, the pyramids of the Great Pyramid, of the pyramids of Egypt, some of them have suns. Egypt, some of them have winged suns. And so I wondered, well, what if instead of being winged, they were the ones with the more realistic representation of the sun? Then I tried the first measurement that had recently been said to be in the Great Pyramid was the E number. The number E defines a catenary or a necklace taken by the two extremes, and I gave the measure of the number E. And then I found myself with the surprise that I had to cut the tip of the pyramid. I had to cut it in such a way that sphere with the number E gave me a little square at the top. At the moment of cutting it, whose perimeter, guess what it was? The number pi, that's right. Of course, when I found myself at the top of the pyramid, the number E on one side and the number pi on the other, which are two of the four essential proportions that we will talk about later, I realized that this could not be a coincidence. So once I finished rebuilding it, I measured it, and when I measured it, when I asked the computer for the measurement, the big surprise was 314,159.27. which is exactly 100,000 times the number p, or what is the same, the number p with 7 decimal digits, which represented when I immediately went to look for the history of mathematics, to anticipate between 3,000 years first and 4,000 years later to the evolution of mathematics.
Moreover, it is not applied in an intuitive way.
It is applied.
It is applied with a mathematical brilliance and above all a precision, and with a lot of intentionality so as to leave a kind of stamp, and above all like the trail of breadcrumbs so that one can follow it. At least that's the feeling I get with what you're explaining.
Of course. Oh, of course. Then we came across a pyramid with a total singularity that had a sphere, that had a base first, that had a pyramid with the faces facing inwards, and that had a crowning sphere. So 3 parts is what you were talking about. Regarding the faces, we will talk about that when the time comes. But the faces, the surfaces of the faces of the pyramid, as strange as they may seem, present numbers that are associated with the duration of the lunar month.
The lunar month is astronomically complicated?
No, but let's see, there have been lunar calendars since ancient times. Therefore, the length of the lunar month has been known since ancient times. What is surprising is that the surfaces of the lateral faces give you absolutely exact numbers of the lunations. Lunations. They become exact in the sense that they are hundreds of lunations, and we will see this.
Well, we'll see it, and in the next program we'll continue to see it, because we have a lot left to tell about this podcast that will continue to follow. In the next one we will talk about the Great Gallery. We will talk about the stellar channels. These are things that we still have pending on the money, and that I'm sure will be of great interest to you. Miquel, hey, thank you very much as always for being here.
Thanks
An absolute
to you,
pleasure.
And thanks to you.
And nothing, see you in the next one. Just a reminder, please, if you like this podcast, please like it. You have it all in the description of the video. There you can follow us on the social networks that we manage, where we will put more extra material, and subscribe to the channel if you are also happy with what we usually publish. Thank you very much, and see you in the next one. Best regards.